These are New York's dark days, moments when the city grappled with challenges that tested its mettle and the resilience of its people. Welcome to the other side of New York City. New York City draft riots took place in July 1863 during the American Civil War. Union forces were tasked with maintaining order. Riots resulted in significant casualties, with estimates of around 100 to 120 deaths and many more injuries. It was one of the largest civil disturbances in U.S. history. President Lincoln's body was laid in state in New York City's City Hall, a solemn tribute to the fallen leader. His body was viewed by over 700,000 people during its 3-day lying in state, April 24, 1865. In 1887, Jacob Riis captured a photograph of the Short-Tail Gang at Corlears Hook Park in New York City. They were one of the most notorious criminal gangs of the Gilded Age, terrorizing the Lower East Side and the docks of Corlears Hook. In 1888, Bandit's Roost was located at 59.5 Mulberry Street in the Five Points area of New York City. In March of 1888, a blizzard swept through New York City, leaving 400 dead in the city and other locations. The weight of the ice was so great that it caused wires to break. Vendors of Italian bread on Mulberry Street in New York City around the turn of the 20th century. Giuseppe Morello, who lived in the early 1900s, was the founder of the 107th Street Mob and the Morello crime family. This family is now known as the Genovese crime family and is one of the oldest criminal organizations in New York City. Kids playing in the street gutter of NYC and around puddles of raw sewage next to a dead horse, 1905. Widow and boy rolling papers. In the tenement buildings of New York City, many residents, including immigrants, rolled their own cigarettes as a cost-effective way to smoke tobacco, 1909. A police officer stood in the street, witnessing the tragic aftermath of the Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire. The lives of 146 people, mostly young immigrant women and girls between the ages of 14 and 23, were lost that day in the Ash Building in New York City. In New York circa 1920, children rushed to Van Brunt and Sackett Streets when they heard that Prohibition agents had dumped wine into the gutters, eager to scoop it up. On September 16, 1920, a bombing in New York City's Wall Street and Broad Street left 38 dead and hundreds injured. This attack has been historically linked to anarchists and those sympathetic to communism at the time. In 1924, Louis Wicks Hine captured a photograph of young Bootblacks working around Trinity Church in New York City. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, many unemployed Americans lined up at soup kitchens in New York, desperate for a meal. Depression was triggered by a combination of factors, including the stock market crash of 1929, known as Black Tuesday. In the winter of 1931, a shanty town of temporary dwellings was established in New York City's Central Park. The term Hooverville was used more broadly to describe similar communities across the country. A photograph taken in 1936 in New York City, United States, shows a flag flown from an upper-story window of the NAACP headquarters, bearing the message that a man was tragically lynched the day before. In 1947, New York City was hit with a powerful blizzard, bringing heavy snowfall and strong winds. In 1948, a Todd insecticidal fog applicator was used to spray DDT around Model K Heffernan at Jones Beach in New York, supposedly to demonstrate that it would not contaminate her food, a hot dog and Coke. It was later found to be a carcinogen and banned in 1972. Bedloe's Island in New York, 1948. It was renamed to Liberty Island in 1956. William O'Brien, the New York City Police Commissioner, was seen destroying a pinball machine with a hammer, enforcing Mayor LaGuardia's ban on pinball games, 1949. A subway train in New York City collided with another at the station, Mosholu Parkway, resulting in a crash, October 1952. In 1957, George Metesky, known as the Mad Bomber, was arrested for planting 33 bombs in New York City between 1941 and 1957. He was pictured smiling behind bars after his capture. The devastating mid-air collision of two planes over New York City on December 16, 1960, resulted in 134 deaths, 6 on the ground. DC-8 fell in Brooklyn, setting fire in a dozen of buildings, while the second plane crashed on Staten Island. Bill Epridge captured a photo of Karen, a heroin addict in New York City's Needle Park, shooting up. Many places got that nickname, Bryant Park, Sherman and Verde Squares, in the 1960s and 1970s because of illicit drug activity, 1964. A rioter fights with police during the Stonewall Riots, Greenwich Village, New York, June 1969. This event was a pivotal moment in the fight for LGBTQ+ rights. The subway at the 145th Street station in New York City, 1973. Subway in the 1970s was plagued by crime, graffiti, decay, financial crisis, service reductions, train breakdowns, delays, homelessness, panhandling, and strained race relations. The Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn was crowded with people and littered with debris on July 14, 1977, the day after a large-scale power outage in New York City. The Guardian Angels were founded by Curtis Sliwa in 1979 to reduce crime in the NYC subway system. They patrolled the city as volunteers to deter crime and remain active today, 1980. Bernhard Goetz, dubbed the Subway Vigilante, shot 4 young people on a subway train, becoming a representation of the fear that New Yorkers had of being robbed or assaulted, 1984. Paul Castellano and Thomas Bellotti were tragically found dead in front of Sparks Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan, New York, with Castellano's body on the sidewalk and Bilottti's in the street, December 16, 1985.